This is IBM Museum. And I've been through so much with this issue that I'm going to show on the 7496 executive workstation. And of course, I still have the units separated because I've got to look at the CRT, but I'm going to talk about an issue that will crop up. And it, I feel that I'm honest to say, unless you have this knowledge from me, you're not going to be able to get through this issue. And I'm confident of that because only I've studied this particular issue for years and went through and documented this aspect. And it's nutty. It's there's an element there that I'll have to explain when we get to it. But I'm going to go through. I've got everything connected. I'll be able to switch back and forth between my input sources just to kind of show what I'm working on here. But it's just I I, I'm not going to stand up or get enough in view of the camera when I'm standing up here at the bench because I went through in the process of resolving all this and I split my pants. I bent over and split my pants. Split. I don't want that misunderstood for something else. And the reason I'm not trying to show my backside on video, but it's just one of the things that happened to me along these steps. And there's even some aspects I'll cover later on that turned out not to necessarily be the issue. I went down a lot of paths, and I'll actually show that aspect later on. Um, just for the people that are interested. It's an interesting side aspect, and there may be some related videos with other methods, in particular what the executive workstation has built in. So I'm going to go through and I'll get turned around, and like I said, I promise I won't try and stand up to show my backside. But we can go through and work with the unit here. So this assembly that I have for the 7496, I've gone through with the MCGA initialization error that happens. And that was from that the postcode. In fact, I've got it right here. That error that just prevented the system from getting through post and displaying video, even if you have another video output, not even using the screen, which I still have that issue. I went through and I had, once I replaced the planer, and I've got the original riser in there, just to kind of show that it's got that block out for that highest slot, remember? And then the battery for the real-time clock. And that's a critical aspect of this video as well. That's original, at least, even though the planer's been replaced. I had to go through and replace the 720 KB diskette drive because that wasn't working for me. Now, the unit that I had that, I marked as good and it operated for me at a time, even earlier tonight, I was able to get this to boot, to go through a boot diskette like I needed, but it's intermittent. And so I've got other drives. I'll have to go through and see if I can resolve what exactly is intermittent with this. So we've got that set aside. I've actually got a 1.4 megabyte diskette drive that's in there that I know is working. And this is my good fallback diskette drive that I typically have on my maxed out Model 30. And it's an easy swap. You don't even have to configure the system at all. I can probably have a video on that, just showing, hey, you have the 720 KB drive in there that works. You go through and all you do is pull that 720 KB drive and put the 1.44 megabyte drive in there. And there, the system goes through and auto configures at the next boot and runs that fine. Now, the diskette I do have in here is a 720 KB boot diskette, and I have the MS, I think it's like MS-DOS 6.21 that's on there. And I was even thinking at a time, I need to go through and mark it, get a label on it, but it is double-sided. And you can see that it doesn't have, the other side of the that that shows that it's a 1.44 megabyte diskette. It's double density diskette, 720 diskette. And I actually have, and of course the system files on that, it's a full boot diskette. I've shown that process in the executive workstation before. The only other detail I put on is the appropriate debug .com version on here. And of course, that for the MS-DOS 6.21, that has to be the version that Microsoft releases that, or it tells you incorrect DOS version. And I'm only using DOS debug in this instance to kind of show this issue, to show how to resolve. What I'll likely do is in a later video, I'll go through and show how to do that from ROM Basic, because this system, of course, it doesn't have a hard drive. So if you don't have a bootable diskette in there, it'll go through and it'll beep at you and it'll get into ROM Basic. And even though it does show the error that I'm going to talk about, you can correct that with the right input from Basic as well. And that's just going to be a little bit more laid out. I have to show the steps to go through for that. It's just not quite as easy as debug. Now, as I say, I'm confident that really it'd been hard for someone else to diagnose this particular error. And I actually have just a video short. It's a minute long, but it gives me all the critical details of what I need. And that is this video. It's in the short. I mean, you can see it on my channel. And I'll go through. I do leave this screen up for quite a long time. But I'll go through and I'll actually want to pause this at a appropriate point where it shows what I need. And I wish on this system I had a way to go through and make it a little bit more full screen, just to be a little bit visible. I realize that screen is really kind of hard to see, but I'll go through and I'll give the link to it. Easy to find on my channel as well. Just to show you the values. And I'm looking at the second to last line. It's a critical thing because that is where that real-time clock has the IO port registers for particular values. And I'll go over those step by step as I show this issue. And as I say, I can try and work between my input sources to go through. And unfortunately, with the setup I have, I can't show the camcorder output, which you're seeing right now, plus the video input. And, at a future time when I get a little bit better setup, I can go through and show both screens at once. For this, I may go through to turn on the webcam back behind me. Like I say, I just have to be careful that I don't rise up out of my seat just to show my split pants. But let's go through, and I'm going to reach down under. I'll flip the switch. I do have the captured video connection. Got the monitor to go through where it is connected. The power switch, we'll turn that on. And let's go through and switch over to that. As I go through, I'll flip the switch, go through to the VGA. And I don't know if the internal webcam, let me see if it gives enough of a view. Okay, probably can do it because it'll show me on the keyboard and other things. If I switch over to the camcorder output, I just don't like that phase difference between the views. as my body moves through the camera views. So this is the issue that you're going to have. I'm sorry, you fix everything else to the executive workstation, and this is going to happen unless you do this fix that I know about. So if you have an executive workstation, pay attention, because otherwise, I'm honest, you're not going to get through anything of this error. I've got little pop-ups showing on my recording system. I'm going to clear those out. Thankfully, I don't have the noise interrupting me or anything like that. So it tells me to set the time and date, and to resume, press the F1 key. Okay. So we're going to go through the setup process of this, of what I, encountered. Okay. So I'm booting MS-DOS, that boot diskette. I don't have an autoexec.bat, so it prompts me for the time and date anyway. If I did have an autoexec.bat, as long as it understood that that was a valid time and date, it would go through and, of course, boot straight away to DOS. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to set the date. I'll even set the time. It's getting late. Okay. And we're to the DOS prompt. We're even going to do a date. Shows the date correctly. Time. Shows the time correctly. Now, this is the instance where that DOS clock, of course, in other words, once the system's running, it keeps track. And if you go through and you set times and dates, if I went through and put a new value, it's supposed to plug that in, and it'd be the same value as not having that autoexec.bat, where, whatever I put in DOS, it's supposed to be written to that real-time clock. And that's an area I struggled with. I thought, well, it's a newer version of MS-DOS than the version 3.3 that the MAL 30 originally have, what the planar is inside the executive workstation. But we see the time and date. We're going to go through. I'm going to just do a warm reboot. And that doesn't even power things down. In other words, understand there's still power, and the system still prompts us to set the time and date, even though we did that. Okay. And so I'm going to do F1 to resume. And we're going to see the default date again here. Okay. So Tuesday, January the 1st of 1980, that's the default date. Tells us to enter a new date. And of course, we did that before. We can go through, and it's just, we're going to get it in the loop, but we go through. I'm going to go through and just press enter, press enter. So in this instance, I have debug to help me with an aspect of the real-time clock. We're going to go through, and I've copied over that to the boot diskette. Later video, I'll show you how to do this in ROM Basic, so you don't even have to have debug, don't even have to have a diskette in the drive, and you can go through and correct this error. The riser, as it is, it'll hold, as long as you quickly change out the riser, that, and it's got the battery soldered in, you'll be fine. It won't go through and reset it as far back as this sequence. So I'm going to go to debug. What I want to do is I want to do an input. Let's look at kind of a, for instance, we're going to go through to we can go through to the E3 value. Okay, and this is the seconds on the in the real-time clock. We just have to say input E3. It shows what the value is. If we do another input E3, okay, so we don't see that value turning over. We don't see the real-time clock. If we do, what's the next value? So E0 and E1 are the microseconds and milliseconds, respectively. Those are going to go through. In fact, we could go through it. Let's see if they turn over. We're just going to do an input of E0. Input of E0. Okay, so that's turning over. Let's do an input of E2. Input of E2 again. So that's turning over. Microseconds, milliseconds are being updated. Let's go back to input E3. Okay, and we're seeing, okay, so I'm just looking through. Okay, E3, excuse me, is the minute. And so we are seeing the minute change over. And then E2 is seconds, because we're seeing a good result there. Let's go through E2. Good thing I corrected myself. It's easy to confuse these field values. Okay, so that's counting, 5 seconds between each time they went through for the update. The input of E3, at some point, the minutes are turning over as well. If as long as the seconds go through and they go to 59 and then back to 00, it goes through and increments the minute. Okay, so let's look at input of E4, which is the hour. Okay. And so that hour just being 00. And that very well could be just from that real-time clock. I mean, I didn't update the time and date. Let's go through. So for okay, so E5 is the so-called day of the week. And I even should have populated this. And normally I've talked about a value. I don't think a 00 value should actually exist in that E5. I think it should work from 1 to 7, not a 00 to 06. Now, in my study of the real-time clock, the day of the week, it's not any association with like 01 meaning Sunday, like today is. It seems like it updates a value in there, and DOS does it gives a day of the week. It calculates that independently. So it doesn't really take this value from the real-time clock at all. Let's go through and, okay, so the I input of E6, that is supposed to be the day of the month. And that could be very well correct as well here too, because as I say, we're seeing that value, that January the 1st of 1980. Okay, let's look at E7, which should be the month. And again, we're seeing January marked there. So if we go to the input of E8, and this is a real critical one because it's the whole hinge of this issue. That is supposed to be the century value. And in my study, I found that when it's was we're in, say, 1999, the value there was this F0. When it's in in the 2000, like 2022, this is actually a value of C0. And it mathematically, a calculation or whatever else, even in that binary coded decimal, that just doesn't make sense. But it's a fact of life. I went through it. And if you don't study this issue, if you didn't know that, you'd be lost because you wouldn't know the correct value to plug into that. Now, moving on further, let's go to input of the E8 IO port register. Let's give me E9. Okay. Okay, and this is supposed to be the year. Okay. And of course, that F7 value, that's binary coded decimal. That's an invalid date. I mean, sometimes they do it in the sense of that's a track for, it has a position of a certain date, and earlier than that date being, in a sense, a negative number or a subtraction from a certain value. But really, in this instance, that should be, with the default date, that should be 80 that's in there. And so if we go through to like the input of EA, remember hexadecimal. After E9, the next hexadecimal, the register in hexadecimal, is EA. And debug naturally talks in hexadecimal. It's not in decimal format. You have to get used to hexadecimal. That's just a format that I natively work in. I understand hexadecimal very well. So it shows F1. Now, earlier in, let's go through and look at EB. Let's look at EC. Okay, let's look at ED. Let's look at EE. And let's look at EF. That's the last registers of the real-time clock. Now, I thought that those from EA to EF I thought that was like a timer functionality. It looks like there's actually a magic code value in there to let the real-time clock know that it needs to turn over. And what I did really is I just worked through debug and we can do it from the absolute beginning, where we're going to go through. Let's look at the IO port register E3. It has the value, and that's the minutes. Remember that? That's the minutes. We're not going to get, unless it was right at the time to change over, it takes a minute for that register to update. Now, we're actually hitting right at 10 p.m. at night here. It's late. By the time I get this uploaded, I don't know if it's going to be after midnight. I'll probably try and take it home and get a faster upload. I'm going to plug in and just say, hey, it just hit 10 o'clock. I'm going to go through and I'm going to say, I want to output the value to the E3 register, comma. You don't have to worry about spaces either. 00. Okay, that updates the minutes. I'm going to go through. Let's update Let's go to the next value. Let's look at what it is. So let's go through to E4. Okay, so that should still be the hour. We're going to say output to E4, comma, 22, military time for 10 p.m. Okay. We're going to go to the okay, let's go to E5. And remember that I think it had that 00 value. Since today's Sunday, we're just going to do the convention. I'm going to go through and say output to E5, the value of 01. Okay. Moving on to E6. Okay, that is the go input E6 to see the value. It's 01. You know, it thinks it's the first. Let's go through and let's say output to E6, the value of 20. That's what today is, the 20th of February. Even though you're watching this later, by the time it gets uploaded, it's the 21st. Today is the 20th. Okay. Let's look at the E7 register. 01. Thinking it's January again, when it's actually February. So I'm going to go output of E7, comma, and you can do 02 or 2. I'm going to do 2. You know, if you do just do a 2, it automatically knows what you're doing, that it's going to say, hey, that's 02. Okay. So then we're to the point where if we do an input for E8, shows that F0. Now, if we were to go through and even though we have that date set in there correctly, and we're saying, you know, later on we'll look at that 22nd, or we'll look at the value. In fact, let's go through right now. Let's do an input of E9. Okay, that's the year. Remember, that's that F7. So even if we got that value in there of, you know, to represent that we're in 2022 for the century, that 20 of the century, this value for the year, F7, is invalid. We're actually going to go through, we're going to say output to E8 of that C0 value. And that's the 20 for the century. Just that odd encoding, whatever it is. We're going to say output to E9, comma, 22. Okay, so we have all the values for the time and date, the current time and date right now. But when I went through my test and rebooted after this, it still gave me the set time and date. I went into looking at the registers again, and it showed the correct values in there, with the exception that it reset that century back to F0, meaning the 19. So it thought it was 1922, and the real-time clock says that's an invalid date. And so that was one of the iterations. I went through and I learned that for the minute-long video of the values that are in here. In fact, let's go through, continuing on. So the first of those values is the EA register, being F1. On my 1 minute video for the real-time clock on the Mall 30, my maxed out Mall 30, where I ran that IO port viewer on the 14th of February, it gave me that register, the contents were 00. And so there may be some magic value that has to be in those registers for the system, when it checks it. And later on, we'll do a BIOS examination and go in there and kind of look at what values are plugged in or what is checked to say when the system posts up to say, hey, is the clock running? Does it have a value date in there? If not, I say set time and date. So I'm going to go through and say output to EA of 00. Input of EB is FF. On the 1 minute recording I did, that quick video, just a 1 minute video, was instrumental to me looking at and saying, why are the values different? Let's just go through and we're going to write the value to the EB register of 0. We're going to look at EC, FF again. On my 1 minute video, that is the value of 00. So I'm going to say output EC 0. Okay, if we do an input of ED, it shows 0F. Now, in my video that I did, it shows the value of 0E. Just to be consistent, I'm going to plug in the value of 0E like it has in that 1 minute video, because I don't know what those values for the timer or how the system is using that. Now, this real-time clock is the same that's used in the old AST 6-pack. They had a real-time clock, a battery, and a real-time clock chip. They were on an adapter board that you could put in your PCXT, since I didn't have a real-time clock built in, that, when you had the system powered off, that it went through and updated that. It's the same real-time clock chip, although use of some fields is different, and it's a wholly different IO address on the MOL30. And so going through, we're going to look at EE. Okay, it shows D5. Now on the 1 minute video I did, it shows the value of FC. So just to be consistent, I'm going to go through and say output to EE the value of FC. Let's look at EF. And it says FF. And that's the same thing it showed in the 1 minute video that I did. So we now have those values, and except for the date and and also the time, the time totally different from what it was in my video, but the date is only changed from the 14th to the 20th, and we've updated all those register values. And as I say, later on I'll do a video and show how to do that from ROM Basic. You don't have a diskette in the drive, it boots into ROM Basic. You can go through and you can populate those values as well, just to get through the real-time clock issue. If you don't go through the sequence, and there's more to be discovered, what magical values of registers are and everything else, I just thought it's time for a video that makes it work. I'll go through and analyze the particular details. Okay, I don't have to do that particular register at some later point. But I wanted to get it working, get it through this, because you go through and you have a riser in there. You go through a riser that has a good battery on there. You put it in there. You're going to be prompted to set the time and date. You're going to set it in DOS. You're going to set it, even you can go through and set it in BASIC. That doesn't look like it goes through and updates and gets the system understanding that, hey, there's a valid battery in there and you should be working. So you're gonna go through that unless you have this particular sequence plugged in. So we're going to do a Q for quit. And I just have to look at how I'm doing on time. Under 35 minutes. We're good. So that gets us back out to the DOS prompt. We're going to do a warm boot, Control Delete. We got a single beep. We didn't get prompted to set the time and date. Okay, so it's starting MS-DOS. I don't have an autoexec.bat file, so it's going to prompt us for the time and date. But it's got the correct time and date now. So we just press enter. And that time is right on as well. We just press enter. We don't want to input any new date. That's fine. If we did go through and do that update, it should go through and update. In fact, let's go through and do time. Okay. And we're going to go through and say it's an hour later. So let's do, 23, 11, 40, whatever. Okay. Okay, so if we go through and do debug, let's look at the hour field, which is the E4. Because E5 is the day of the week. In fact, let's see if it updated the day of the week. Let's do input E5. Still shows that 01 that I kind of did a rough setting of saying, hey, it's Sunday, so let's put on that 01 value. And it doesn't appear that DOS really goes through and overrides that or anything like that. It doesn't know the field sequence with this BIOS version. Let's look at E4. It's got that 23 value. We could go through. Let's output for the E4 going back to 10 p.m., which is a value of 22. So we're going to go through. Let's input E4. Take a look. Okay, it's 10 p.m. Do a Q. Let's look at the time. So from that, what we're seeing is there isn't an update put back to DOS. And that could explain a little bit of this issue. Let's go through. Let me set time. And you can have it on the command line. You can just put the time and write it. You write time, space, and then put the time. And that's another way to do it. Let's go 22. So we're not seeing an interaction between DOS and the BIOS time and date. That's not going through. We're not seeing it update either way. And that may very well be gained. What I did is I even programmed the revision 04, the latest BIOS for the Model 30, to try on a test system. And I actually stumbled through it that way. And there may be a BIOS fix that they had in that revision 04 that, since I'm going through the sequence enough with the 02 version, there was, and the Model 30 never had that revision 03 BIOS released. They went straight away from revision 02, which is on most of the Model 30s and on all the executive workstations, the 7496 that I've seen have had that revision 02 BIOS. So I'm doing a fix here from the aspect of that older BIOS version. And the newer BIOS may resolve a little bit more of this. Even after I did the update, though, I on my test system, I didn't see it quite catch. And so, but we know how to go through. And we're back to the DOS prompt here, okay? I'm going to go through, I'm even going to go through and power the system off. We've gone through, should prompt us for no video source or whatever it comes up with my video capture. Okay, yeah, no signal. Okay, let's go ahead and power it back on. So in that interim, you know, that riser, the battery on the riser was what kept the clock chip going. Okay, same thing. It counted the memory, but that time we were not prompted for the time and date, just like when we did the warm boot. So you follow through this sequence. Once you get your executive workstation to whatever level that you have to do, you probably have to replace the planer if you're getting where it just halts on that postcode 07 like I was having. And you may have to do some work on your diskette drive like I did. And I'll go through, I've got other diskette drive, 720 KB diskette drives, and I'll get a working unit back on this drive and everything else to get as much of that original mechanism. And then, of course, the next step, I've got to look at the video and the monitor. And I think there was one system that did present, it had bad video. It had a split thing. That's in the 8-bit guy video where, and that's ultimately the MCGA controller on the planer. So a planer replacement on that system would have resolved that issue. And I think still on that, that system, there was still that real-time clock issue that came up. So whoever gets that system in the future, they replace the planer, they get through that. Their CRT is working fine, it seems. They're still going to have this real-time clock issue. And so this, like I say, this is going just round and round for me. I went through, I split my pants, I had all this other stuff happening. As I'm going through and moving stuff around, putting the test system up there, I'm trying to look for what revision of BIOS is on there. And, you know, it just, I was struggling. And that's the reason I recorded these earlier videos. I thought my maxed out 30 is the only system that I've had of the MUL 30 that goes through and it's updating the real-time clock properly. I'm going to touch it. If I have to change the riser, I'm going to do it quick. And I'm not going to have to go through the sequence again. I've got spare risers around. I can do that. But that was instrumental, seeing that working system of what values are in there. And plus that past work I've done, even on videos that were released, you know, several months or a year ago, to what I studied and put on the SIF news group years ago in trying to define those fields. I'm still going to go further and analyze whether it's what is truly the timer registers on there. The MUL 30 was built, it has some resemblance in those alarm functions, the registers used for alarms, as the PC convertible, even though this has a hard power switch on it for the MUL 30 and the executive workstation. All the other systems that are based off of the MUL 30, the PC convertible, you press the power button, it goes into a suspend condition, a static RAM. And so all that is basically saved away. So when you press the power button to effectively what you think is powering up the system, it actually just goes and comes out of that suspend condition and displays what you're working on, right? What you left off. As long as the battery or that power source is good enough for those PC convertibles, it's able to resume for that. And that alarm function even goes through, and it can be set to resume at a certain point in time that you set. There's some utilities with the PC convertible that to do that. That the MUL30 and the systems that are based on the MUL30 planar also have in their BIOS. I don't know how that interacts, and we'll get studying this a little bit more, but I wanted to go through, once I saw this issue and had a kind of my eureka moment, I wanted to go through and get on video for the other Model 30 owners and the other people that have the executive workstation to know that that is the way that you can use DOS debug in this instance to go through and analyze what is in those registers to kind of see where the real-time clock chip thinks it is. And if it does have what it thinks is an invalid date on there, what the BIOS, when it goes to that post routine, it just goes through and it has spurious data, or it goes through and puts odd values in there. And so this is the way to get that straight, get it to be one less error that we have to deal with, even though to get these systems working, it's likely replacing the planar straight off, maybe replacing the diskette drive, and maybe going as far as I have to with the CRT to figuring out why exactly it doesn't display video. I get raster, I get everything on that CRT display. I can even go through and turn it up and have it on camcorder to show, hey, I get that, but I don't get any characters. And I messed around with that too. That is the next step for me, is to get into that CRT. If I can get that fixed, figure out what the issue is there, I can get this unit back together, get it looking as original, and complete and as whole as it was intended to be. And maybe I win the race out there. There's a few other places that have the executive workstation. They talk about getting it working and everything else. Again, I'm confident that they could hit on this time and date issue, and that's still, the system is broken in a way, because you have to go through and put the time and date in there on every boot. No matter what, the system always says, hey, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what time and date it is. So that is the area that I wanted to touch on for this video. And, we still came out pretty good. It's under 50 minutes of video. It's informative. People can fast forward through it or whatever else as they want. But that is the way to solve this thing that just caused me you can't see you. I mean, I wasn't pulling beard hair out, but I don't want to take off my cap. People don't want to see that, of where I was pulling head hair out or whatever else, and how I just went round and round with this issue. And even earlier tonight, saying, I don't know what's going on, before I stumbled upon getting the system to take hold. So we're through it. And if you enjoyed the video, certainly click on that like button. Subscribers are growing. That's fantastic. I'm getting out there. I've gotten over 1,000 subscribers. So YouTube, I see my own videos recommended to me. I hope they're getting recommended to others, because that's the visibility now. People search on this stuff. They search on executive workstation. Maybe I need to put some tags in my video, and just to have this as a critical aspect of the executive workstation, and also the MUL30, that PS2 MUL30 that this is based on, has the planar, has the BIOS for those MUL30s, to get that out there so people have a solution for this. And we'll figure it out more. That DOS updating between the BIOS and things like that, that may be in the BIOS revisions. I'll have to get through and study that as well. just to know what's going on a little bit more. But there'll be time for that. There'll be time for that. I was glad to go through and at least get the solution, and we'll figure out the details later on. A lot of time I say I fix an issue. I fix the issue. I don't try and necessarily explain what may have happened. I try and figure it out in the long term, but we'll figure out what the particular thing is here that caused me, because I had that Mul 30 planer even in a system. I knew it kept track with the real-time clock, and I pulled out the planer and pulled the riser out of the system and benched it, and then instantly it's complaining that set time and date, set time and date. And I put the planer and the riser back in the system and set time and date, set time and date. What did I do? The system was working before the damage. I was voltmeter checking through leads and everything else. So I got the right voltages. Yeah, I got the right voltages. Hooked up an external power supply to the riser without a battery to give enough power to it. Still didn't work. Look, I have the right voltage there. Why is this real-time clock chip not working? So it's just that where the system was thinking it's got invalid date and time and going through and putting spurious values or something in there. DOS not going through and updating the real-time clock area, and that may be on that DOS version what it thinks, because the Mul 30 was a really it's the only one that has that really that real-time clock at that IO address, save for, of course, the systems that are based on the Mul 30 planer, and then that Epson Equity 1E that is a clone of a Mul 30 has the real-time clock, same real-time clock chip, and it uses a lot of the IO registers the same, which is a interesting thing that we'll get into later on. But so that I told you to click on the like in the video, went off on my tangent. I'm back. We talked about subscribers, everything else. It's just time to end the video, to end my night, to get this video uploaded so people can watch it. So this is IBM Museum. That's all I have for now. Got to go change my pants.